How many genders are there?
It's a spectrum, so like a lot.
Can you name me a few?
You don't think that there really is any clear-cut distinction between male and female as biological categories, is that correct?
So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman. Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term.
Well, 3 years ago, a Florida family story went viral for raising a gender-neutral baby.
I identify as non-binary.
I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone.
Gender clinics across the country have seen a huge rise in child referrals.
I have been misgendered 3 times in the past 24 hours.
A Christian teacher who was banned from teaching for misgendering a pupil has lost his high court battle.
He got the axe for failing to use a transgender student's preferred pronouns.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
I'm a member of the transgender community. More accurately, more specifically, I'm what you call gender non-binary or gender non-conforming.
I'm so glad that everyone has had enough of this. Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Incogni. I hope you all liked the very dramatic introduction that I tried to execute for this video. I'm trying to do something different, okay? I expect all of you to tell me in the comments that I am the Lord of Editing. And if you don't, then I shall scream. Anyway, as many of you know who've been around this channel for a number of years, I have continually brought you stories concerning the transgender movement and its weird cousin, the gender ideology movement. Although at this point, they're more like conjoined twins, just fused together to bring the rest of us suffering. But I have always believed that had these ideologies simply stayed on Reddit and on Tumblr and in the recesses of academia, things might have turned out differently. But no. But for the last decade or so, the conjoined twins have been beating down the door of every single institution, both politically, medically, socially, and basically calling for outright submission from absolutely everyone. Through force, mostly, and against all logic and reason, this ideology, these ideologies, have become mainstream. I really, really wish it had all stayed on Tumblr. As things have accelerated, I have told you stories about violent male criminals housed with female inmates. I've walked you through the many, many ways this ideology has attacked and erased women and motherhood. I've told you about men beating the snot out of women in women's sports, and how this movement has destroyed our entire comprehension of the English language so that we might accommodate the Zirzims and their chest feeding and chemically induced nipple discharge. Yeah, I bet that's an image you're glad I put in your head. Pour that on your cereal. I am sorry, that's a lot. So with that in mind, what will come as a surprise to none of you is that this ideology, these movements, have finally pushed things way too far. And now they get to see the fruits of their labor come to fruition in ways that they didn't quite expect. As most of you likely know, since day one of his presidency, Donald Trump has signed several executive orders that walk back some of the insanity integrated into US society over the last decade or so. The first was an executive order stating that the US government will only recognize 2 sexes. As an aside too, I find it endlessly embarrassing that we needed someone to sign an executive order stating that there are only 2 sexes, given that this is something that we have understood forever. It is odd that the last 10 years or so has completely eliminated all logic and reason. I struggle with this. The second executive order will essentially remove transgender and gender ideology weirdos from military service, rightly pointing out that the military's existing policy excludes people who have medical conditions and physical defects. The third executive order will end gender-based mutilation of minors. And in his most recent move, Trump signed a 4th executive order banning men from women's sports.
This common sense action from President Trump ends the disgusting betrayal of women and girls by the previous administration, who for years catered to radical activists who wanted biological males to be treated as women in workplace showers, competitive sports, prisons, and even rape shelters.
Once again, unsurprising to none of you, this has caused a lot of screaming from the usual suspects. But with all of this said, and with everything that I am about to lay out in the rest of this video, I want to make one key crucial point that basically summarizes why we're talking about this. These executive orders have obviously resulted in a ton of screaming, but the people doing the screaming haven't stopped for a single second to realize that they did this to themselves. So I'm gonna walk you through what led us to this point, and it's terrible and I'm sorry in advance. But you want to know what I'm not sorry about? You protecting your private information, which is why today's video is sponsored by Incogni. Ever Googled yourself? If you haven't, you probably should, because then you too can be traumatized by how much information about you is out there and public. Information like your addresses, your birth date, your email, even your social security number. I know, I also find this really creepy. Data brokers and data websites are actually a huge issue, and they're the reason that you get spam calls and texts and emails. Because they sell your data to whoever is asking. And if you're like me and you find all of this deeply uncomfortable, well, I know a company that can help. Incogni. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf and requests the removal of your personal information. It also handles any objections from these data websites. Incogni also ensures your data stays off the internet by conducting repeated removals, taking your data down if it pops up again. Which it can and will, because data brokers can re-add you. Privacy is actually hugely important to me, so I really mean it when I say that I genuinely love Incogni. Not only does it work, but it's insanely easy to use. You make an account, fill out the information you want removed, and grant Incogni the right to work for you. Then sit back and let them do all the work. Incogni also lets you protect your friends and family, which is why you can add up to 4 loved ones to your annual subscription. And if you're at all concerned, Incogni offers a risk-free 30 days. So if you don't love it, you can get a full refund on your service. So if you too want to take your data back from creepy data brokers, then click the link in the description or go to incogni.com/Sydney. And don't forget to use code Sydney for 60% off an annual plan. I would argue that most of us, me included, started off pretty indifferent to all of this. I can only speak for myself, but I've always been pretty live and let live. You want to call yourself a man and live as one? Okay, no skin off my nose. You want to call yourself a Zirzim in your weird online community away from me? Okay, you do you. You want me to treat most people with decency even if I don't agree with some of the things that they're doing, obviously, unless those things are illegal, that's a different story, then sure. That's fine, I can do that. But you see, the problem is, these activists and the people in these movements have pushed people like me, and probably a lot of you, way too far. Somewhere along this psycho road, this stopped being about decency and the tenets of live and let live, and became about forcing compliance, compelling speech, forcing women especially into situations that are unsafe or make us feel deeply and inherently uncomfortable. And so the acceleration of this forced compliance and these crazy situations have forced people like me, the people who've long been in the middle, just floating around being pretty indifferent, right over the edge of the cliff. So now, no, I won't use your preferred pronouns. I don't want men in women's bathrooms and locker rooms, no matter how much of a wallflower that man is. I no longer believe that the Zirzims are harmless internet dorks. I see them as people perpetuating genuine mental illness with the support of politicians and academia and the medical community and basically every other institution under the sun. So if you're here watching this, part of this group of people, wondering why it seems that everyone turned on you so quickly, or if you're like me and you're like, yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, this was always going to get like this, but Sydney, please tell me more, I'm gonna walk you all through how we ended up at this exact spot in time. And of course, it all started very subtly and insidiously, as these things so often do. In the early 2010s, progressive companies, HR departments, and universities around North America started adopting preferred pronoun policies. The University of Michigan, for example, introduced a system in 2013 allowing students to designate pronouns, he, she, ze, zer, on class rosters, with the expectation that professors comply with this self-identification. Employees were also encouraged to add pronouns to their email signatures at particular companies. The concept of non-binary was already swirling around Tumblr and Twitter, but now these fringe identities and psycho-neo-pronouns were showing up in the real world. Non-compliance at this point wasn't heavily penalized, everything was painted as voluntary, but cultural pressure started to accelerate.
I'm non-binary, and this is why I use this abbreviation and not this one.
Today I'm going to show you how to use a-er pronouns in sentences, so let's go! A-er pronouns are a form of neopronouns, and oh my goodness, isn't that just so beautiful?
So one of the unexpected parts about being a tall trans femme is the amount of times I'll be walking behind a woman on the streets and I'll skirt around because I got long legs and places to be, and then they're scared because they think that I'm a man, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I'm on your team.
By 2013, Australia was allowing people to put X as a gender marker on their passports. This was adopted by other places around the world. News outlets like The Guardian and NPR started running pieces about non-binary identities, confusingly using they to refer to these people. By 2014, Laverne Cox appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Transgender Tipping Point." Just a year later, we had Jazz Jennings on everyone's screen, the young boy who was marked as transgender and going through a very, very public transition. Celebrities like Miley Cyrus were coming out as genderqueer, and at this time too, misgendering someone online, calling a trans-identified male he, which you still really can't do here on YouTube, triggered intense viral outrage, doxing, social ostracism, and even job loss. Social media platforms were banning people left, right, and center, and honestly, they still kind of are.
Can you explain why misgendering is an act of violence?
A Christian teacher who was banned from teaching for misgendering a pupil has lost his high court battle.
He got the axe for failing to use a transgender student's preferred pronouns.
The social enforcement was fierce, and the legal enforcement wasn't too far behind. As we saw that not too long after all of this, UK police were showing up at people's houses to arrest them for misgendering people online. By 2016, Canada's Bill C-16 blew up in a major way. The legislation was designed to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to include gender identity or expression, but all it did was upset people about its propensity for compelled pronoun use. And it gave us Jordan Peterson, who at the time was a professor at the University of Toronto, and who refused patently to use pronouns like "zir" and "they" for mentally unwell people.
Like lobsters.
In the same year, the US Department of Education issued a directive to public schools that forced them to let trans-identified students use the bathroom and locker room that matched their gender identity. If the schools refused, they risked federal funding cuts. Around the same time, the New York City Commission on Human Rights declared that the refusal to use a person's preferred pronouns, including "zir" and "here," I haven't heard of "here," that's a new one, could be discriminatory under city law, with fines up to $250,000 for employers and landlords, just because they don't want to call you "here." It's spelled H-I-R. Yeah, I know, it's very weird. Unsurprising to absolutely none of you, after this, things started to go downhill pretty quickly. While many trans activists continued to argue that they just wanted to be left alone and live their lives, the wider population was being subjected to both legal and social compliance. Because of course they were! By 2018, they were pushing to erase women from discussions around pregnancy, motherhood, and menstruation, arguing it excluded trans men and non-binary people. They pushed to change terms like woman to uterus owner or mother to pregnant person. Politicians started adopting this language.
The largest labor union in the country, the National Education Association, had been proposing a resolution for future contracts to replace the word mother with birthing parent.
You shifted in places from using the term mother to birthing people.
Health equity for Black birthing people.
And birthing people.
Birthing people.
When asked, American judges couldn't and refused to define what a woman is.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman? Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
To be clear, you wrote this while you were a sitting judge, 2017? You were on the bench?
That is correct, after a case I had.
So, as I understand it, you don't think that there really is any clear-cut distinction between male and female as biological categories. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
That's what you wrote.
What am I even listening to? How are judges meant to interpret the law when they can't even interpret biology? This is alarming on all the alarming levels. Kind of terrifyingly, this wasn't only a political and social issue. The medical community was starting to participate. Of course, not only in the language changes, but the just kind of general mass delusion that was taking place. People in the scientific communities started insisting that there were more than two sexes, tying themselves in knots trying to justify this position. We ended up with terms like sex assigned at birth and the insistence even from some outfits that men can give birth.
Do you believe then that men can become pregnant and have abortions?
Yes.
Dr. Kumar, can biological men become pregnant and give birth?
So men can have pregnancies, especially trans men.
Can men get pregnant?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Secretary, materials coming from your department, you've referred to mothers as birthing persons, replacing that title with...
Are mothers not persons?
Mothers are persons, but it seems to be more inclusive, like you're trying to include another gender in that.
I'm all about inclusion, Congresswoman.
My name is Danny. I'm a non-binary birther. For those of you who don't know, I gave birth to my child 20 months ago at home. It was beautiful. It was a spiritual experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I did it as a non-binary person, not as a woman, just to be very clear.
Some medical professionals have insisted and continue to insist that there is no difference between trans-identified males and a female when it comes to female sports, that men should be allowed to compete against women, giving us the likes of Leah Thomas and other athletes who have stolen opportunities and wins from female competitors.
In June, a complaint was filed by the families of 3 girls who say allowing transgender athletes to compete in sports as the gender they identify with unfairly discriminates against their daughters.
But I also don't need anybody's permission to be myself and to do the sport that I love.
So like this idea that like, oh, you're not a biological woman. Well, I am a woman, that's a fact. I am female, so all my identity records, my racing license, my medical records all say female, right? And I'm pretty sure I made a biological stop, so I'm a biological female as well.
I can't say what I want to say here. I will get banned from YouTube. I was actually quite happy earlier when I read this article saying that the asteroid that's set to hit our planet in a couple years will probably not hit it anymore. And then I watched this clip, and now I yearn for the meteor! By this time, TikTok was in full swing, and you all know how much I love TikTok. And it became a breeding ground for mental illness and all of this gender insanity. Young people were ideologically captured, and all of this started showing up much, much more in schools and in universities and in the medical field, where kids were insisting that they were something other than their sex. To answer this growing demand, gender clinics started popping up all over the place. Doctors made light-hearted TikToks talking about performing double mastectomies on healthy young people.
Gender clinics across the country have seen a huge rise in child referrals.
Our journey with a transgender child.
You know, we've seen staggering growth in gender medical treatment for children.
My name is Ella and I'm 7 years old and I'm transgender.
The UK's Tavistock Institute was prescribing puberty blockers to people as young as 10, insisting children must be gender affirmed early on, lest they go and, you know, do horrible things to themselves. The insanity was absolutely everywhere, coming at us from all sides. And rather than seeing this, rather than identifying the growing backlash and anger and frustration coming from the wider population and trying to be understanding, the trans activist gender movement people instead decided to double down. Wow, that's so crazy. I can't believe they did that. That's just totally unexpected from them. Threats from trans-identified males towards women they label as hateful became commonplace. Images of women being hanged with captions like "dead TERFs" or "kill a TERF" have circulated across the internet, cheered on by so many. While they scream about just wanting acceptance, they fail to rein in the worst actors among them, including those perpetuating legitimately violent rhetoric.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a turf, punch him in the fucking face!
T-shirts with messages like trans rights or else and protect trans kids with images of knives or guns have been seen at trans protests across the country. Countless stories about males exposing themselves to women and young girls in locker rooms and bathrooms have made headlines, met with silence from trans activists, of course. Incidences of women being essayed by trans-identified males in prison have gone ignored by the community that fights for their inclusion at the cost of harming women. Even the most hailed trans activists have behaved wildly inappropriately, with one incident making national headlines when Rose Montoya was seen partially naked on the White House lawn in 2023. The message that everyone who disagrees with you must be a Nazi has eroded any attempts to reach common ground. But worse than that, it has emboldened people to continue making violent threats in the name of protecting themselves. Like this video, for example, that circulated in 2023, where a trans-identified individual made several alarming remarks.
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. I dare you to try and stop a transgender woman in my presence from using the bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. This is a call to action. You need to arm up. Plain and simple. Go out, buy a gun. You need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your fellow transgender brothers and sisters and theys and thems. You need to protect the rest of us in the LGBT community, as I'm going to do myself. Because there are lots of people like me who are not afraid to die.
I always find these type of videos really interesting because they're usually being made for people who can't even run up a hill. The people that you're instructing to get firearms probably think they're too heavy. It actually just makes me think of an army of David Hoggs, and I don't find that particularly intimidating. The notion that someone stopping you from using a bathroom is worthy of physical violence is a direct result of the ideas that trans activists have been spreading for over a decade. That anyone who doesn't abide by the growing insanity of the gender ideology and trans movements is a direct threat. The many viral "it's ma'am" moments certainly haven't helped bring the public around to accepting these types of ideas and behaviors in civil society. Once again, putting it mildly. Say what you want to about the "it's ma'am" crowd, but they have given us a lot of very fun videos to laugh at over the years. I'm just trying to give you guys some silver linings here. The irony for me, and I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, but I'm gonna do my best, is that many trans activists and allies from the trans and gender-based communities, these movements, paint themselves typically as the victim in all of this, despite the fact that they are, in fact, the most aggressive perpetrators online a lot of the time, and typically are the ones making these situations even worse. I just really struggled to see how the most aggressive voices in a community and across an issue who are contributing to people getting doxxed and fired and harassed and whatnot are the victims and all of that. I feel like I am missing something. The dots are not all connecting. Anyway, all of this said, you might be asking, Sydney, what's the net effect of all of these things? Well, I will tell you. People are tired. They are tired of walking on eggshells, and they are fed up with being accused of bigotry or transphobia, lest they use the wrong pronoun with a stranger that they meet in the store. Many people, me included, are tired of watching language be altered and erased to accommodate a fraction of the population, erasing age-old truths that we have known and understood since the beginning of recorded history. So yeah, it's not really a mystery why the pendulum is doing a backswing right now. Depending on your perspective, the funny or sad part here in all of this is how many people actually just used to wholesale support and or accept the trans movement and its objectives and many of its people. But as time has worn on, those same people have become infinitely less accepting because of the tactics used by the trans community community in forcing their acceptance. Are we seeing a trend here? In their attempts to basically shame and attack people into compliance, they have instead caused a ton of the broader community to jump ship. People don't take too kindly to children being exposed to things like drag shows, hypersexualized pride events. They don't like seeing drag performances at school assemblies and class education that is graphic and misleading, telling little children that gender is a spectrum and sex is not, in fact, immutable. The hostility with which trans activists and allies approach arguments, the refusal to acknowledge the realities of our biological nature, and the constant attempts to change language to accommodate people's precious feelings has accelerated the disdain and anger in the broader community. And I can assure you this pendulum swing is about to get much worse. Or better, depending on which side of the aisle you're on and how you feel about all of this. By refusing to put meaningful, logical limits on self-identification, by blurring the lines between science and ideology and forcing their ideas onto the wider population, trans activists and their allies have ensured that all of the ground that they have achieved in recent years is going to be reversed. So the bottom line is that whether or not people agree or disagree with what's currently happening, the backslide of support that we're currently seeing and the reversal of policies that we're currently seeing is entirely self-inflicted. I am personally of the opinion that most people probably would have been fine continuing this live and let live philosophy had the trans movement and its activists not gone completely off the bloody rails. At one point, there probably actually was a middle ground that could have been achieved here, but again, these people made damn sure that that was never going to be the case, and now we have very much bypassed that stage. And just to be clear, I'm not saying any of this with a degree of glee or whatever. I honestly would prefer just to be left alone, but apparently that's just too much to ask. In the end, my prediction here is that this entire movement is going to unravel. And honestly, although I'm not super sure what that looks like at its nth degree, I am very pleased that finally some sanity is making headway. Now on that note, and before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder, check out Incogni using the link in the description. As I have said previously, I unironically love this service, and if you are somebody who is concerned about your information being out there on the internet, definitely check it out. It might be for you. Now I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Are you on my side of this issue where you also started off very indifferent and have ended up quite frustrated by all of this? Are you on the other side of the aisle where you think that it's very necessary to pursue trans rights and gender-based things? Are you somebody who thinks that we are taking things now too far and that rolling back many of these policies is actually a bad thing? Do you think that it's a good thing? Do you think that it protects women and girls and ultimately is bringing society back to some sort of sanity-based equilibrium? Do you think that this is going to unravel ultimately, that this movement is going to kind of die a slow and painful death? Or do you think that maybe we can actually find a middle ground? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you have made it this far in the video, congratulations. I always like having you along for the full ride. If you are new here and you are not subscribed already and you would like to see more of me and more of this kind of content, feel free to hit that subscribe button, as well as leaving this video a like and a comment, because I do read the majority of them and I really like hearing your feedback. Of course, in the interim, my dear potato children, I hope you all stay safe and well, and I will see your very pretty faces in the next video.